Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. A couple of staff members at TVO are being recognized for some super cool work. Alanna King and Sarah Trick developed a media style guide for disability coverage, and this earned them the 2023 Michener Award. The fellowship recognizes that idea for developing a media style guide. The work is coming together at the Journalists in Residence program at Carleton University, and they're both here to tell you more about the project. Sarah Trick is a digital media producer and journalist at TVO, and Alanna King is an instructional liaison for educational partnerships for TVO's digital learning department. Hey, good morning, Sarah.
Morning.
And hello.
Can I just jump in
Please.
and say, we are being not recognized. We've only just started the work. What we were awarded was the Michener L. Richard O'Hagan Fellowship in Journalism Education, which means that the Michener Foundation has been kind enough to give us and our partners at TVO and Carleton University funds to complete this work. The work has not been done yet, but we're very excited to be beginning this work.
Okay, very cool. We'll count that as a Ron Burgundy moment where I'll just read what's in the script in front of me and then look like a total jerk on air. And also, good morning to Alanna.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having us.
So, Sarah, let's start with the real basics here, because not everybody's been through a journalism program or a broadcast program. What is a style guide?
So, a style guide, every publication generally has what's called an in-house style guide. So that will be, different things in usage. We capitalize this word. Here is how we write 2 p.m. This is, what we how we speak about certain things in our copy, or how we produce segments for broadcast. In the case of AMI, most journalism organizations in Canada use the Canadian Press style book and then kind of add on and go from there. Our style guide is going to be a little bit different.
So, Alanna, why did you want to undertake this different style of style guide? Why was this something you both wanted to work on?
Well, actually, Sarah Trick approached me, and she approached TVO with the idea, I think, in February of applying for the fellowship. And Sarah, do you want to jump in with sort of how you got started with your reasons?
Sure. I mean, as a disabled journalist, I look around at coverage about disability, and I think we can all agree that we as a profession could do better. But a lot of times journalists don't really know, even where to start. So, I was thinking about different style guides that are out there, such as Elements of Indigenous Style by Gregory Younging. And I was like, wouldn't it be great if journalists had a resource that would give them kind of disability 101, or even just teach them how to start asking the right questions, such as where to go for sources, who to talk to, politics, funding, that kind of thing. And not to say that these things don't evolve or that we're going to be comprehensive about everything, but just so that journalists won't get lost, I thought it would be great to have this resource. So I approached TVO because I was like, hey, I could just write this resource, but I'm lucky enough to work at a news organization that also has curriculum development specialists on staff. It would be great if this came with the curriculum. So they said, Alanna is your person. I met Alanna and she was great. And we kind of developed the idea for the project together from there. It was sort of a whirlwind process.
Okay, so that was a really important piece of context to know where the origin story came from. So, Alanna, Sarah approaches you. Then what are you trying to bring into this conversation? What's the expertise that you're leveraging as this creation moves forward?
I sound like the cranky old teacher at the back of the classroom, but I've been doing this for thousands of years. What I mean is, I've always championed people who are, on the fringe. And I myself am on the fringe in terms of my own intersectionalities. But at the same time, as a teacher, what's really important to me is to see this real life example of, culturally responsive pedagogy kind of coming to the forefront. And And I've been, in my own background, I'm a drama teacher, a media literacy teacher, an English teacher at the secondary school level. And I can see my own students inside the work that we need to do to put this style guide together to happen. So I have like a secondary school background, but I've also worked a lot with adults in the education field and in libraries in order to talk about how do we make places safer for really difficult discussions. And I think this style guide is going to do that.
Sarah, as a broadcaster with a disability, I have a lot of thoughts about the current media landscape when it comes to disability coverage. What are some of your observations in terms of the landscape that maybe prompted the desire to dive deeper into this style guide?
I will say that in some respects it has gotten a little bit better since I started. You see more disabled journalists working in newsrooms, which I view as key. But I still see, a kind of flattening around disability. I see a lot of, that same old story about so-and-so has a disability, but she doesn't let that stop her from doing this totally unrelated thing. Aren't we all so inspired by her? And I'm over that.
Yeah.
I was over that when I was 6 years old. I'm certainly over it now. But then as far as like larger stories, such as, the COVID-19 pandemic, I think was a great example. I think we as a society are conditioned to view disabled people as others. And you see this in the framing around COVID, like everybody can get back to normal, except for vulnerable groups have to take care. But even people who might actually belong to some of those groups aren't conditioned to see themselves that way. So people might take risks that would actually harm them. The disabled are seen as other. Normal citizens can go back to their lives, but they don't see us as, part of the community, part of society. And I think media coverage has a great deal to answer for in that respect. So, things like that. Just seeing disability as a niche subject instead of a story that touches all of us at one point or another.
Alanna, I thought Sarah used a really interesting expression there, the flattening in the way that disability is covered in media. And certainly part of that is language, right? There's always this search for really, really neutral language, which to a certain point is aspirational, but sometimes it's not descriptive. So as you're going into the approach in this style guide, how are you balancing perhaps that desire to find language that is fair and appropriate, but that also is properly descriptive and communicative to the audience?
I keyed right in on that phrase as well, Dave. And for me, in education and in media, we are both sort of perpetuating the problem, and I think also we are the answer to the problem. And so I think that reaching for maybe not necessarily the ultimate neutral place, but to show how language and culture about disability are, we can reframe these over time, and we can show the progression of the places that we've come from, but also show where the true aim is of where we need to go with our style guide. Then I think, we might actually make the difference, but in a gradual way that we can get people on board, because part of that is reculturing the entire system of both education and journalism in order to make room for the individual narratives that we want to focus on.
Can I just jump in a little bit here?
Please.
I think it's so funny because, I'm a journalist, but I'm also a naturally very blunt person. So when Alanna and I are collaborating, often I'll read something that she wrote and I'll be like, okay, say this in 40% fewer words. And Alanna, will read something that I wrote and she'll say, okay, so maybe you could phrase that a little more gently so that you don't make everybody around you angry. And that'll work pretty well for us. But, one of the trends that I've noticed in reading coverage over time, that there's a debate in the disability community over whether person first language or identity first language are more appropriate. And there are strong advocates on either side, and it's generally accepted to do different things in different communities. But journalists don't necessarily have any of that, I would say, cultural contexts. So they might have heard that, people with disabilities is more appropriate in all outcome, or like in all cases. But then you see these little phrases like those with disabilities. And I'm like, what is the point of that? You're trying to use person first language, but the whole point of person first language was to have person in there so that people aren't dehumanized. So what does those with disabilities mean? Who is this for? And that is what I'm hoping that we can help with, is by giving context around this language, so journalists will know what they're saying.
So Sarah, scratching a little bit deeper at that and understanding that the guide is still in the development phase, that you're still working on this, what are some of those areas that you're really hoping to drill down on as you work through this guide, understanding that there are some objective truths in regards to the way in which disability can be discussed, but knowing there's still some very personal lived experiences. So what are you trying to approach here as you're attacking this guide?
Well, like I said, I think that journalists could do a lot better when it comes to covering disability, but I also think that it's not necessarily people's fault all the time, because the way that newsrooms are structured doesn't lend itself well to good disability coverage. So for example, like maybe a camera person might not know how to frame a shot of somebody in a wheelchair. Somebody might be wanting to interview someone who's deaf, but they don't know where to look for an interpreter or how to behave when an interpreter is in the room. It's all a very foreign landscape to people. And also because newsrooms move quickly, as you know, it can be harder to get down to nuance when it comes to a story. So, a reporter might be looking for a story and they might think like, oh, I've heard of this disability group. They're often in the news. I'll reach out to them. They should be an expert. And maybe they do have good intentions, but maybe they don't have people with lived experience on their boards. Or maybe if you look at what people who actually have the disability are saying, there's a controversy around that. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't cover these organizations or that they don't have a place, but a reporter might not even know that there would be a controversy around that, or how to ask the questions to figure it out. So they might miss a story. And that's what I'm hoping that our guide can address.
Alanna, last question going to you. Where does this go from here? What are the next steps?
Oh, it's so exciting, Dave. So what we're going to be doing is working with the Carleton Faculty of Journalism. They're going to allow us to work with their students and in their classrooms or in their virtual classrooms. And we're going to start to practice what we've got in mind. And this will be everything from, at journalism school, it'll be everything from first year reporting, boot camp, I think is what they call it, Sarah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but also, media coverage in terms of the actual framing of images. And I'm really looking forward to that part. But in the background, we're also going to be developing the platform at TVO where the style guide will live, and it will be digital so that it will be open source and so that it will be, evergreen, because we can continue to maintain it in that space.
I appreciate both of you taking some time this morning. I know I kept you a little longer than initially planned. So Alanna, thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Sarah, thank you for your insight. You have a lovely day as well. Best of luck as you continue to work on this style guide.
Thank you, and please get in touch. I'd love to hear all your thoughts.
Oh, that you have just entered a very risky game, wanting to hear more of my thoughts. That is Sarah Trick, a digital media producer and journalist at TVO. Alanna King is the instructional liaison for educational partnerships for TVO's digital learning department. They are developing a media style guide for disability coverage. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.